China's Wang Yi has urged France not to decouple from Beijing, and he'll likely aim to smooth ties with Italy, which have soured under that country's new far-right government. And the politburo member and China's top diplomat is on a whirlwind trip through Europe. It's all in an effort to bolster relations, which have been challenged by China's close links to Russia. And yesterday he met French President Emmanuel Macron, the two agreeing to contribute towards peace in Ukraine. Reports say Mr. Macron is still hoping that Beijing will press its ally Moscow to return to the negotiation table. Mr. Wang Yi told him that China will stick to an objective and impartial stance. Wang Yi also spoke with French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna. He reportedly said that China has always regarded France as a priority for cooperation and emphasized that Beijing is willing to engage in more high-level exchanges. Let's get over to Giles Gibson. He's in Rome, where a meeting between Wang Yi and Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani is on the cards. Giles, what can we expect from this meeting with Mr. Tajani? What's on the agenda?
Well, Dawn, we've had very little information so far from either side, the Chinese or the Italians, about exactly how this visit is going to play out and indeed about what they're really going to be focusing on in their talks. What we're expecting to happen is for the Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani to welcome Wang Yi to Rome in the coming hours for some talks, and then we are also expecting another meeting on Friday, potentially between Wang Yi and the President of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, or perhaps alongside the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, as well. So that's how we're expecting it to play out. Of course, we are approaching the one-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we are certainly expecting the response to that invasion to be right at the top of the agenda in terms of these talks between Italian and Chinese officials, as well as some talks on trade ties between the two countries as well. But look, those talks on the invasion in Ukraine, they are only going to highlight really the difference in the responses from the EU, from EU countries such as Italy and China, because of course the EU has rolled out wave after wave of sanctions on Russia. It's tried to cut off any purchases of Russian fossil fuels, of oil and natural gas. It's also, of course, the EU been sending lots of military assistance to Ukraine, whereas in contrast, China has always said that it remains neutral, although it has repeatedly called for there to be peace negotiations.
Giles, tell us how all of this is likely to go down, because previous comments by Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni have soured ties between the two countries. Does this visit indicate perhaps a strengthening or the mending of relations?
Well, I think one thing that Wang Yi is going to be trying very hard to get is some sort of an extension, or perhaps, an agreement to talk about extending a memorandum of understanding that was signed back in 2019 when Giuseppe Conte was Italian Prime Minister. That was a memorandum of understanding that brought Italy into the Belt and Road Initiative, the only G7 nation at the time, and actually still the only G7 nation that has joined that vast Chinese sort of investment initiative. Now, the current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, she has describes that decision to sign that memorandum of understanding as a big mistake. And since taking over, she has tasked her foreign ministry with really looking into that agreement as the clock ticks down to the end of it at the end of this year. So at the moment, it's not looking very likely that the two sides will renew it, but we'll have to see, how the talks go over the next few hours or so. And really for Wang Yi, just finally, this is, the first time in a very long time that he's had a chance to have face-to-face talks with European officials. Of course, after the start of the coronavirus pandemic, you had restrictions in Europe, and then, of course, the zero COVID strategy in China, which really prevented officials from getting together around the table and discussing all of these issues in person.
Giles, thank you for that update. Giles Gibson there speaking to us live from Rome.